You were supposed to be there at 10 a.m. for sound check, but there was a giant crowd of cars. So somehow we got the state police, and these state police were psyched. They pulled us out of the traffic and they let us ride up the median strip with the cops with the lights on, and everyone was looking at us. And so I leaned out the window and played the trombone, and you started yelling about Primus.
Flipside, roller derby, drag city, SST. Hip, priest, cold hands, peel on BBC. Mixtape, C90, like candy, sonic boom. Green mind, monkey trick.
Lollapalooza was an annual traveling music festival founded in 1991 by Jane's Addiction frontman Perry Farrell and manager Ted Gardner. The festival's early years featured a small second stage where some of the era's best lesser-known bands performed to sometimes puzzled audiences. In our last episode, we spoke to John Rubely, the second stage's young booker. In this episode, we'll hear firsthand from some of the bands who performed on the second stages across the U.S. Join us for stories of lifting weights with Tool, posing as Primus, clueless kids in Sonic Youth t-shirts, playing in the days after the death of Kurt Cobain, and Nick Cave singing What a Wonderful World with the Flaming Lips.
The Coctails were a Chicago-based garage jazz band known for swapping instruments, musical experiments, and handmade merchandise. They ran the record label Highball, and their members went on to perform in The Sea and Cake and 11th Dream Day. We spoke with Mark Greenberg in Chicago, where he manages and records at the Wilco Loft.
And we actually played the very first Lollapalooza when it came through Chicago. I think 93 was the year that Tool was on the side stage, and we had the slot right before Tool, the Coctails. And we played, tink, tink, tink. We had a xylophone and, a little tiny accordion. And the Tool people, the fans did not know what to do with us. I don't know if we were hated as much as not understood. People were really visibly scratching their heads like in a cartoon. So Tool was huge, and so people would be lining up to see them hours before they went on, and they had to sit through us, which was very twisted on so many levels. But then we played side stage with Brainiac and Yellow Tango one year, and Brainiac, those guys, I mean, it was 100 degrees in the sun, and those guys were wearing like boas and like long sleeve. They were just glammed out. It was insane. We cut off our sleeves and our pants. We looked like mailmen. And it was hilarious.
Swirlies were Boston's preeminent shoegaze band, formed in 1990. In 1993, they appeared on the Lollapalooza second stage in support of their debut album, Blonder Tongue Audio Baton. We spoke with Ron Regé Jr., Damon Tutunjian, and Andy Bernick.
It's still really funny how you look at the main stage and you're like, what is all this shit? And then the side stage bands are all the legendary bands that have box sets and reissues of their records. Sebadoh isn't on the main stage, was on the side stage. But like the idea of the side stage bands playing at like a giant festival was just weird because no one had ever played to a crowd that large. Because in general, like festivals weren't a thing. Damon, you remember the thing with the police bringing us in there, right?
I remember we were stuck in traffic.
So we're stuck in traffic.
And we were like, I was really panicking.
And it was like you were supposed to be there at 10 a.m. for sound check, but there was a giant crowd of cars. So somehow we got the state police, and these state police were psyched. They pulled us out of the traffic and they let us ride up the median strip with the cops with the lights on, and everyone was looking at us. And so I leaned out the window and played the trombone, and you started yelling about Primus.
I don't even know what Primus sounds like.
No, but you were like Primus because we were joking that we were Primus, that we were getting this like.
Oh yeah, like make way, rock stars.
Like, who's getting the police escort? And we're like Primus.
I remember this vividly. So they had opened the gates and we were playing. I think we were one of the first, like the first or second band that played on the second stage. So they opened the gates and like thousands of people start streaming in because the main stage hadn't started. They kind of stopped in front of us and there was quite a crowd of people there for about, 5 or 6 minutes. And then Rage Against the Machine started and then they all left. So then there were maybe like, just people streaming by in the distance.
A lot of people must have seen us tune.
Definitely.
You were definitely first, and it was definitely noon. I had definitely not ever heard of music happening at noon before.
While we were playing, Rage Against the Machine started, and that was a little bit of a disappointment.
We were like, why is there a band that no one's ever heard of on the main stage, and this side stage has like 10 bands everyone knows? It was very weird. It was like, what? Where did they come from? Who are they? Royal Truck in the middle of the afternoon was weird. I remember looking at them and being like, what are they doing? And it's bright, like in the sunshine, at like 1 in the afternoon.
I didn't know what they were all about, but they like seemed like real rock stars.
Tsunami formed in Arlington, Virginia by Toomy and Kristin Thomson in 1990. They were also co-owners of the highly regarded Simple Machines record label. Tsunami were equally noted for their music and their unwavering commitment to DIY principles, which established them among the most respected voices in the alternative community. We spoke to Toomy and Thomson.
What happened was we were invited to play at Lollapalooza on the side stage, and we said, shouldn't there be a record store? And so we started, making the argument that we should have a record store where people can actually buy records at the festival. And John Rubley was game. And I think we suggested that Otis from Pure Platter Records should be the guy to run it, because Pure Platter was like the coolest record store we ever knew of. And he was sort of like, he was a game guy anyway. And then I think Thurston and like Kim or some of them, they were going to be on the side stage with us. They all got very excited about it too. We decided that we would make the case for this, and then we had to figure out all of the logistics, like what records should they buy and how many should they have, or whatever. And the way they had the side stage going was, I think it's right that the same bands played the headline all the way through, but they rotated the side bands. So for like 5 or 6 shows, there'd be different bands. And I think by the time we got on the tour, because we were not part of the first rotation, it had failed. I noticed it. But I think our fax was about making the argument for the thing, which was a very Simple Machines thing. Like, I was like, wouldn't this be a great idea? Let's just work really hard to make it happen. And sometimes it would be great, and a lot of times it would just be like fun for you, but it really wasn't. We weren't necessarily businesswomen in the case of
festival merchandising.
Exactly. Maybe later, if Brian had helped back later in the day, Free Kitten vans or whatever.
Yes, Free Kitten had some fancy, like, I still have mine, like a sort of a baseball shirt with stripes on it, and then like Free Kitten in sparkles, like the cat head, and it said Free Kitten, and it was very like sparkles on a shirt. You're like, what? And yeah, so they were definitely in the top tier of side stage merchandising.
So how did John find you, and what was his pitch to you? What did he ask you to do for him or with him?
I think it was just the minute that Tsunami was a phenomenon. So like the same way that Sebadoh was a phenomenon, or whoever was, the people who were invited. Had it been 6 months earlier or 6 months later, we wouldn't have been invited, maybe.
Yeah, if you look back at the roster, it's a lot of folks who we were either label mates. Well, let's just say we had done a project together or something, Unrest or Scrawl or the Coctails, or they were just like one step removed in the scene of some sort. So I don't know how John curated the list. It really did make sense, that it's a person that had a perspective and an understanding of what was going on. So,
what was it like playing it? Was it a different, I mean, it's a different kind of gig than the 99-cent DC gig or whatever, right?
It was like an early lesson in the disheartening future of indie rock, I think, in some ways, because like it's very hard to be a musician because you write a song about something you care about, and then you're the one who's performing it. And if people pay attention to you, you feel great. And if people don't, you feel bad. And it can really mess with your head around. It can become a validator or an invalidator of you. But in a small scene, the sort of stakes are different. And sometimes they're higher in certain ways. You can have like real enemies or nemesis or whatever in your community. But for the most part, like you're all part of the same thing. And you can all feel sort of like cheering of that. But once we started working, like, later, like when I started putting records out outside of my own records, like when I put out the Licorice record with 4AD, it was amazing to me that like the woman who worked on the PR for that, she would talk about bands in two ways. She'd say, oh, they're really going to break or they're over. Like there was just this kind of like real binary around, and it had nothing to do with the value of their music at all. And so Lollapalooza was like that. It was really fascinating to me to see like, whatever, Thurston Moore or Kim Gordon beginning to play on the side stage while, they always had the side stage start before the main stage started, like by like an hour or two. And so, you had all these people like waiting at the front of the empty stage for, I don't know, was it Tool that started? It was something like Tool. That was like the opening band.
I think it was Tool.
And so they were like, they were right there for like 2 hours while they could be watching Kim and Thurston or Sebadoh, but they just didn't care. Or they'd be wearing a Sonic Youth t-shirt. And like, we did this thing, didn't we do this thing once where we like went around and interviewed people? We like, Sonic Youth, that's so cool. It's wonderful. And they're like, why are you waiting at the front of the Tool stage? They're playing. But, at that scale, things are a phenomenon. And so it was like one of the first moments where you could just see that. And also it was really hard on us. I mean, it was like a fun adventure and we were young and healthy. So, but like all the major bands were on in buses and we were driving our cars. So we might have to do like a 12-hour drive after playing and we'd, be sleeping on floors. And so it was odd. It was an odd thing.
Were you able to translate some of that sense of underground camaraderie to the thing, or was it just too much of a behemoth to integrate that way?
There was a little bit. I think we certainly we tried to bring some in. We were friendly. We already had played a few shows or maybe more than a handful with Sebadoh, and Jenny had spent some time with Sonic Youth. So it wasn't like they were strangers to us. So we would, we'd hang out. They had like a backstage tent. We would support each other, watch each other's sets. At one point, we have a photo of this and we were marveling at it the other day. I think it was because we were at the last two shows of the tour were in Los Angeles, and we made cakes. And we have a picture of Jenny holding
we had a free kitten cake and a Sebadoh cake. It was like, I think we made our goodbye cake thing. We were in a cake phase. We had made a bunch of cakes back at Positive Force House too.
Yeah. And so I assume it's because we had a friend, maybe it was Franklin Bruno's house that we stayed at or somebody's in Los Angeles, where we were able to make a cake so we could take it to the fairgrounds. Mm-hmm. 2 cakes. We also did, Jenny mentioned we would go out to the crowd and mill around and ask people like, how much did you pay to get in? And like there was the sound guy for the side stage, like in between bands was playing the Nirvana record that hadn't yet come out. We were asking people like, do you like Nirvana? Cool. And like, do you like what's playing on the PA? It's okay. We were just like kind of doing those kind of interviews and things like that.
Were you trying to recruit, or was it just to see what's going on out there?
I think it was sort of a little dicky. It was a little bit just like, I think, because it's also, you can't help but feel a little rejected. Like they'd set up the side stage in these weird places. And so sometimes like the minute the main stage came on, it just drowned out the side stage completely. And there weren't a lot of true believers. I think in some of the later side stage, it got, a higher level. Like I think Nick Cave and people like this played, on the side stage in future years, and people would actually come specifically for that. We were just kind of like, I don't know. I mean, there's this whole phenomenon about music, which is like you're either the geniuses or you're the don't quit your day jobs. And, as a musician, sometimes there are people who are just truly geniuses, and they just are. But a lot of it's this gray area of just who got a little bit more attention at a certain moment or was lucky in some ways. And they're all humans along the trajectory. So this kind of like binary of like, I'm going to stand like in, 100-degree heat in front of the Tool stage for 2 hours before they play, when I could have been actually watching a band that might be better over here because I want to be with the good band, was just kind of dumb.
Mosquito was a trio comprised of half-Japanese founder Jad Fair, Sonic Youth drummer Steve Shelley, and $2 guitarist Tim Foljhan. They played a loose, noisy, primitivist rock and roll. We spoke to Fair and Foljhan.
Going into it, I kind of imagined that we would be playing in front of hundreds of people. But then with the side stage, it turned out that most of the audience size, it'd be about 100 people, not much more than that, and sometimes less. So we weren't playing in front of large audiences at all, but we always got a good audience response. I think it was different because so often it would be people that had no idea who we were, because certainly Mosquito was not a recognizable name at that point. So we were playing in front of people that had no idea what we would be doing. I mean, as if we knew what we would be doing. But, but it was always good, though. I think we always played well.
I don't think in those days anybody thought of playing Lollapalooza as selling out. I don't know. Well, for us, this thing happened where our name got on the T-shirt. So we got a percentage of the T-shirt sales, and that brought in, I don't think it was a tremendous amount of money, but to me at the time, I was like, wow, between that and I kind of got by okay that year because of that, like that and a half Jap tour. And I kind of was keeping it together. I don't think maybe I wasn't touring with half Jap anymore. I can't remember, but it made a big difference. The amount of money, whatever it was, a couple $1,000s or something. And it was because of this sort of fluke that our name got on because not all the side stage people were on the T-shirt. And for some reason ours got on there. And so we got money for that. No, there wasn't. I don't think there was a lot of major label interest in Mosquito. Yeah, I think it was just too weird for them.
Well, after Kurt's death with Nirvana, there was a article in Melody Maker saying that Nirvana is going to have me as their new singer, which wasn't true at all, but that's what it said in the article. And after that came out, I've got some pretty good offers from publishing companies for a good bit of money, but I'm truthful. so I made the I guess wrong decision of telling them that wasn't true, and they quickly lost interest.
Mark Robinson formed the indie pop band Unrest in the early 80s while still in high school. He also founded the record label Teen Beat, who released albums from Versus, Bratmobile, and Velocity Girl. We spoke with Robinson at home in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
I had definitely never been to one, but I kind of shied away from going to bigger shows because I liked going to the small. It's like, why am I going to pay 5 times as much to sit in the back row when I can pay 1/5 the amount and stand in the front row? But I don't think I'd ever been there, but we had done this music festival with Slumberland Records and Simple Machines called Lots of Pop Losers. And that name was a joke on the Lollapalooza name. So that was fall of 91. I guess the Lollapalooza was big enough to be made fun of in the fall of 91. I don't really remember it, but yeah. And I think when they called us, I think we were just, it sounded like fun. I mean, we had also done a lot of touring where you're opening in like a big theater for a larger act. And to be honest, that was never a huge amount of fun. But I think it was kind of like, well, we're going to get paid kind of well. And it seems like it could be fun. So we did it. We played 9 shows. And it was cool because you mentioned John Rubley, because he not only asked us to play, but he was also like, who also do you think I should ask? So that was pretty cool. I know we chose at least 2 of these bands that also were just kind of like, they would just play the one show in their town. I was friends with this guy who was in this band called Poster Child, and they played. Unfortunately, our booking agent was booking a band called Poster Children. When I told her that there was a band called Poster Child and they were going to play with us at Lollapalooza, she told the other band, and then Poster Child had to change their name. So I felt guilty for a long time. But then they got a much better name, which is Lamb Chop. So now I feel fine about it. And then there was a band called Fifth Column in Toronto that played the show. I don't know if we recommended Scrawl. That was another one we played with. And then even in like the year after, he called me up again and said, what band? So we had a teen beat band the next year called Blast Off Country Style that played on Lollapalooza 94. And then he called me up again in 95, and we had a band called Versus play on Lollapalooza in 95. It was definitely corporate, and it was definitely weird. And just in terms of like the big sound system and stuff, it was just totally different than playing at a club and just having the larger bands like walking around. Like you'd go to the mess hall tent, I don't know what they called it, and you're like eating across from Arrested Development or whoever. So that was kind of weird. It was still fun though. It was, Tool was on the whole thing on the second stage. And I just remember those dudes brought their own like weights. They're doing like bench presses outdoors, like the whole time while we're just like sitting around, like we're just sitting around drinking beer or whatever. And they're like some serious dudes. I mean, we were just playing so much at that time. It was kind of fun because it was different than like you were playing during the daytime and you were playing outdoors. So I think that in and of itself was cool and fun. I don't think there was any sort of like indie backlash or something like that. You guys played Lollapalooza or anything, not that I recall.
Gonna buy some land, gonna build a house, gonna be a man, gonna find a spouse, gonna sow the fields, gonna plant some seeds, gonna reap my yields, gonna meet my needs at the funny farm, gonna bear my arm.
King Kong was a dancey pub rock band formed by Slint's Ethan Buckler. A very different vibe from most of the other bands to grace Lollapalooza's second stage. King Kong's David Pajo was surprised by how he ended up feeling about the festival.
I was playing drums with King Kong. We were the first band on the second stage of the Lollapalooza that Smashing Pumpkins were at, and Beastie Boys and Nick Cave and L7 and Stereolab. That's where I met Stereolab. We opened the whole festival. We'd start at noon or something to an empty field, and like there would be a couple people, that people would still be filing in. And then the last band would be the Pumpkins, and and I would watch them from the backstage balconies. It was a really open-minded sort of audience, actually, because it was such a diverse collection of bands. It was a different time for sure. Like, I think grunge was still being processed. So all these sort of mainstream type people from pre-grunge were just like, whoa, this is all new and mind-blowing, So it was a big, like a news flash for them. So it was kind of exciting because nobody really knew what was cool yet or whatever, It was a pretty open-minded audience overall, although there was almost no one there for King Kong. It was just like the band playing sort of nerdy dance music, that was on the stage. But I loved it too, because like they had the Tibetan monks. So you would see just like strange, you'd see the monks walking by and then there would be like George Clinton from Funkadelic over there. And it was just crazy, it was a really fun time. And I hated Lollapalooza. Like I was a snob for sure. And just like not interested in all that stuff. And I had such a good time. I was like eating my words, because it was great. And I met the Stereolab guys and I ended up playing with Stereolab, playing bass for them years later. It was great.
Pixies bassist Kim Deal formed the Breeders in 1989. They recorded for England's esteemed 4AD label and had a big hit in 1993 with the song Cannonball. We spoke with violinist Carrie Bradley-Neves about the 1994 Lollapalooza tour.
The main stage was amazing. It was Boredom's Green Day, L7, Nick Cave, Tribe Called Quest, Breeders, George Clinton, Beastie Boys, Smashing Pumpkins. Then I'll go and say, the second stage, Flaming Lips, The Verve, Boo Radleys, The Frogs, Guided by Voices, Lamb Chop, Girls Against Boys, Palace Songs, which was Will Oldham's incarnation of that time, Stereolab, Farside, Shudder to Think, Luscious Jackson, Charlie Hunter Trio, Shonen Knife, Cypress Hill, Black Crows. I mean, it was incredible to see Guided by Voices, Flaming Lips, Shonen Knife, Luscious Jackson, all in a day. I mean, our set was at 5:45. Otherwise, we were free. So the sad thing was that our set was at the exact same time as the Flaming Lips, because I think they closed the second stage, and that was the last set. So, but depending on the layout of the campus, we could often run and catch a few songs at the end, or at least I could. Those shows felt like, even though they were outdoors and they were over there and they weren't main stage, they felt like the coolest, best, most energy-filled, like explosive shows at your favorite, small indie club, except that they were outside and maybe it was noon or maybe it was 4, or they were really very, very exciting shows. There was so much exciting stuff going on in indie rock at the time. And it was just a kind of, universal excitement. There was a lot of, I think, shared energy between all of us main stage. And by us, I mean, not just the front people, but the people who were playing the trombones and the violins and, and running sound and whatever, there was a lot of excitement to go see. There was so much talent on the second stage that year. Unbelievable. Like almost, other than whatever, magazine covers, a leveling of talent, originality. Everybody brought it, whether, they had to play at 1:00 on the main stage for empty chairs, or they played at 4:00 on the second stage when one of their favorite artists was playing over at the main stage. Everybody brought it. Lollapalooza 94. Kurt died in April, and we started rehearsals. Well, get one rehearsal and one sound check for Lollapalooza right back in the day. It was July. So the community was really still very, very rocked by Kurt Cobain's death. It's just like, it was really key to the energy of Lollapalooza that year. It was like, I think it contributed to all of the musicians kind of sharing, a loss, and also sharing a moment of like, but for the grace of God, living for the day. And so, it was like, there was an exuberance and a celebration of music. So there'd be like these, incredibly like passionate and celebratory performances that were about originality, individuality, exuberance, irreverence, like all that stuff. And then also like you'd meet some, you just like, you hop into somebody else's bus, and everybody was in tears. It was a big part of those crazy, lazy summer days of 1994 on a 10-week tour. People's hearts were bleeding, And at the same time, they were like, yay, Lollapalooza. Oh, wait, did that guy die? At the same time, he was the biggest star on the planet. And there was a lot of private mourning going on. Luscious Jackson, those shows were so beautiful. Different kind of joy, a little more muted, but tons of muscle and passion and sexiness and weird, cool songs, great grooves, people packed in and danced. Those were super memorable. The House Brothers at noon, if we got there in time, and I was usually one of like 10 people. And it was like church. It was quiet, and you couldn't believe you were like one of the people who was seeing this incredibly special, spine-chilling, like flights of imagination, weird, dark, sweet. I remember so many of those shows. Every one of those I was by myself. Guided by Voices. All I can think of is so many high kicks, so much high kicking. I was like, oh my God. How can they be so drunk and also kick so well? So much energy. Amazing guitar, shredding. Those were super fun. When Flaming Lips went from blow up to super duper blow up, and they had those fabulous shows with giant furries and beach balls and bubbles. It was just so joyous. They were just so joyous and just a spectacle. And I think ultimately, for me, the reason, a saving grace was they were humble.
Put your face up to the window. Tell me all about your gay folks. It feels better when you're in it. If you're nervous, use the payphone.
The long-running Flaming Lips performed by singer-guitarist Wayne Coyne in Oklahoma City in 1983. On the heels of their unexpected hit, She Don't Use Jelly, they joined the Lollapalooza tour in 1994. We spoke with the band's manager, Scott Booker, at home in Oklahoma.
My memories of the 94 Lollapalooza, I remember the first one was in Vegas, and it was July, I believe. My funniest memory is Michael, the bass player in the Lips, was very into wearing black, and he had these Mad Max type boots that had metal on the front of them, and he had a leather jacket on. And I remember the first day of Lollapalooza, he wore all that stuff. He was there in this thing, and he looked cool, but we all thought he was going to die. And you'd have to know Michael. He's just a very quiet, stoic, always looks like he's in control kind of guy. And we shared a room, back when all was still shared rooms. Michael and I shared quite a bit. And, that day, he was there in that outfit the whole day. We saw, I remember the Frogs, who were wonderful and disgusting simultaneously. I mean, lyrically, it was like, there's no way anything like that can exist now. Someone reissued, I think, their record not too long ago, and I was just like, how did they do that? I just can't imagine, It wasn't Dennis. It was the tall guitar player guy, had these fairy wings, like Tinkerbell, wings on, and Dennis was short, and the two brothers were super tall guys, and it was just this strange dynamic, and Billy Corgan was out there watching them. He loved them. And it was just a surreal way to start the day, because they were probably the first band playing, the first band on the side stage. In some ways, that set the mood for
what an absurd reality that year was going to be. For our stage, we were just on this tiny little stage out in this concrete jungle. And once again, Michael, the whole day, he doesn't even sweat. But that night, I remember him taking a cold shower and just peeling those clothes off of him. And he just lied in his bed and he's like, I don't feel good. And the next day he showed up and he had a t-shirt and shorts on, which he never wore. So it was just like interesting, it was so funny. Going to Chicago, the show that was, to me, on the second stage, the most mind-blowing. Of course, the Lips were great every night, and it was when Jelly was starting to become something. So whenever they play that song, people would you could just feel this energy, right? And on the side of the stage would be Nick Cave and the Beastie Boys. Billy from the Pumpkins was always a big fan. But the show that blew my mind, and I'm pretty sure Stevens too, from the Lips, was Guided by Voices on that second stage in Chicago. You just felt like you were seeing the Kinks in '66 or something, I mean, at that point, B-1000 was a record that was just nonstop played at my record store. I was still working at the record store. We played it all the time. To see that actually happen, because, that record is this weird lo-fi masterpiece. You're not sure, how's this going to work live? And it was magic. It was one of the greatest live shows I'd ever seen in my life, And one of the other greatest live shows I'd ever seen in my life was Nick Cave in Chicago at that show. It was a weird stadium type thing. So the main stage, for the first X number of rows, there were seats. We all loved the Boredoms, right? So we'd go watch the Boredoms, not because you listened to the record so much as them as a spectacle was just this amazing live thing. But literally, we would go to watch Nick Cave I remember those 2 days in Chicago, and there was no one there. So we would just go sit in the front row of those seats. And it was like he was doing the whole show for us. There'd be the Lips and the Breeders and some other bands. We'd just be sitting out there and be like, just in your face. The mushy seat's gonna, you're just like, singing to me. It was just so intense and amazing. And I wish Blixa would have been there because he didn't do that run. And I'm a huge fan of Einstürzen and Neubauten and all Blixa, but it was powerful anyway, I mean, it was amazing. Two of just the greatest shows I'd ever seen in my life were that weekend. And also what was fun that weekend was the weekend Nick Cave came out and sang What a Wonderful World on stage with the Lips, which was really, really special.
The colors of the rainbow are so pretty in the sky. Because of the people passing by. I see friends shaking hands, saying, how do you do? What they're really saying is, I love you.
It seems like Lollapalooza coincided with a moment where the Flaming Lips were maybe going to break out a bit anyway, right? Was there any sort of resistance to doing what might have felt like a corporate gig at that time? And then what was the impact of having done the Lollapalooza tour?
I don't think any of us felt like Lollapalooza was corporate. I think almost the opposite. It felt like, because Perry was the guy who put it together, it felt like this was us doing it, right? So there was never any hesitation on that side. I mean, I would say we felt honored that we were invited to be part of something like that, And I mean, that era of the Lips was kind of this constant nonstop touring. For that album cycle, we put out an album called Transmissions from the Satellite Heart, and She Don't Use Jelly became a hit nearly 2 years after it came out. And Chicago was a city that we played over and over and over. But I think in that album cycle, I think we toured with Lush. We toured with Porno for Pyros. We did the Stone Temple Pilots, Butthole Surfers. Think about that for a second. Talking about weird. You know, they co-headlined, and we were on one of the bands opening for that. We ended up doing a tour where we opened for Tool. We did, the Lollapalooza things. And then what really took She Don't Use Jelly over the top, Lollapalooza was kind of the one that was like, okay, with a record label and I think more writers, because that mattered back then. There wasn't the internet, right? Where more journalists and stuff were taking us more serious. And I think that, seeing these people, when you get people from the record label and from, the industry, because, every band has really two main audiences they should be focused on. And they're two separate but equal things. There's the audience of the industry and there's the audience of just the people, right? The potential fans. You have to play to both. And sometimes you have to do different things playing to both, even simultaneously, right? But part of it was the industry side was seeing the reaction, because so many of them were at Lollapalooza, seeing the reaction of the audience to the Flaming Lips, especially when we played She Don't Use Jelly. That was one of the things I kept harping onto the label about, was like, you got to see this, you got to see this, you got to see this. So eventually we were asked to do one of the most awful things in the world, which was open for a band called Candlebox for 2 months. Longest tour we ever did, and it was with the worst band ever. But Warner Brothers was desperate to make Candlebox seem like an alternative rock band, which is hilarious, in hindsight. And so they really wanted us. And I, went to the guys and they were all like, no! And I went to the label and I was like, this is going to be a very hard sell. I need to go to the guys with some guarantees of certain things. And one was money. And I think I had gotten us a guarantee of $2,000 a show, which at the time was the most money we'd ever earned at a show, right? And when you're doing 2.5 months of it, I remember going to the guys and saying, I've done the math. I really think we could each walk away with $10,000. And everyone's like, wow, I could pay my rent for 3 years, stuff like that. It's just like, but the real thing for us was a guarantee that all the radio people that Warner Brothers were going to be bringing to see Candlebox, we wanted to guarantee that they came early to see the Flaming Lips. And that's when we started getting on radio, was during that Candlebox tour, because they saw that even the Candlebox audience loved the song She Don't Use Jelly, and it really connected in a bigger way. Lollapalooza was in some ways a turning point for where I think people in the industry switched from hearing about the Flaming Lips to thinking about the Flaming Lips, right? Of like, this is an important band that's coming up. We need to pay attention to what's going on. What can we do to continue? Part of what was great about Lollapalooza was, before this, being in Oklahoma, in some ways, we were this group that no one really knew personally. We were these weird guys that came from a place that most bands just skipped and didn't play here to begin with. So we didn't really have an opportunity to become friends with a lot of these people. And Lollapalooza created a situation where Wayne and Steven, Steven's a real charmer. he got along great with all the bands, especially the bands on our stage. But, we became really friendly with the Breeders, and, Steven ended up playing on a Breeders record later on. So they kept their friendship. Guided by Voices were a band that I always stayed in touch with. We all kind of did. So it's kind of a training ground too for artists to learn how to communicate to other artists. You think that that's a natural thing, but it's really not. I think that you have to get used to that, because most artists, most musicians, they're very insular. They're worried about what their peers think, but then they're also so focused on their own art that opening up, paying attention to others, discussing that, it's something that has to be learned. I mean, I'm sure there's some artists that isn't the case, but my experience is a lot of them that is the case. I mean, I even run a college program, and part of it is, for that reason, And I look at Lollapalooza kind of like it created its own scene.
I know a girl who thinks of ghosts. She'll make you breakfast. She'll make you toast. She don't use butter, and she don't use cheese. She don't use jelly or any of these cheese.
Lollapalooza toured each year from 1991 to 1997. It was revived in 2003, but canceled in 2004 due to low ticket sales. It was reimagined as an annual Chicago festival in 2005 and has been going strong ever since. Lollapalooza 2025 features the headliners Sabrina Carpenter and Olivia Rodrigo, two of the biggest acts in the world.
This has been the Revolution Come and Gone podcast with your hosts Dylan Metrano and Gregory Moss. Thank you, John Rubely, Scott Booker, and all the bands we spoke with about their Lollapalooza experiences. Thank you also to Eric Gladstone.